Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. My guest today is former Assistant Deputy Secretary of State Joel Rubin. Joel is now a Democratic political strategist. He's also a former Peace Corps member. He's run for Congress twice, and he's a father of three. Joel has a wide variety of background experiences, and he brings all of those experiences into his current work. Our conversation today touches on many critical and difficult topics, including the war between Israel and Palestine, women's bodily autonomy, and the fight for democracy against autocracy. Joel and I discuss his bipartisan marriage, in which he, a Democrat, and his wife, a Republican, bring their love and respect to even the most difficult of conversations. We also discuss how stress plays a role in the bipartisan divide that's currently happening in our country. So please bring an open mind and enjoy my conversation with Joel Rubin. Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome to be here. Thanks, Marian.
I'm so thrilled to have you. Okay, I want to start with your background because a lot of people who end up working in policy and politics didn't necessarily know that that's where they wanted to be. It often is like, I was a lawyer or
hmm
whatever. I worked in some other industry and then flowed that direction. But you actually went to college and graduate school for politics and policy. So I am very curious to hear what happened in your background that led you to want to study those things.
Well, Marian, I think I'm a bit of a dork. Um, I have loved politics and the issues that are happening around us since I can remember, since elementary school. I remember arguing with friends in middle school about Israel or arguing with them about what's happening in the Pittsburgh mayor's race. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I always was into it. I'd read the New York Times. We had it delivered to our house, and I read the opinion section, try to figure out, my opinions based upon their opinions. And I remember going like at age 12, 13 into the microfilm because we had microfilm back then, back before Google, before it was easy, before you could research by just tapping a button. You had to go look for the information. And I would go look at the microfilm in the school library and I would pick a date. It's like, okay, how about April 10th, 1912? What was happening? And I go look and I pull out the microfilm and there would be the headlines of the day and the news. So I always loved issues, the news, what's happening in the world. And I don't think I had a clue about what I wanted to do with all that, though. I had no interest in science, no interest in being a lawyer, no interest in some specific job. I just knew I liked those ideas. I had no idea what to do with it, though. And, you just keep on following what you like, I think. And when I went to college, I went to Brandeis University. I didn't know what I was going to study. I just knew I wanted to be at a school with a lot of Jews. So it was Brandeis University, and it was founded by the Jewish community for it basically in 1948 because Jews weren't allowed into universities predominantly prior to that. A lot of exclusion from due to anti-Semitism. And so I wanted to go to school like that. And I just was like picking classes. And I'll never forget going to the first political science class I'd been to, and it was Western civilization, Western political thought. And Jeffrey Abramson was the professor, and it was the first term of freshman year. And he opened up by speaking about Plato's Republic. And he starts talking, and it was like everything made sense. It's like, oh, this is what I want to study.
That's so awesome. I've had a similar experience with like finding that professor who just nails it and
hmm
speaks to you in a way where the whole topic opens up for you in a way that you never would have considered it before. But I have to say, when you were describing your trips to the library to, pull the films, that sounds really fun to me now, but I cannot picture a little kid thinking that that's fun. So I love that you just had that nerd instinct from day one. And you said that
yeah.
you guys got the New York Times delivered, but was there a lot of political talk at home? Was there a passion for history, for policy? Was that discussion occurring around you on a daily basis?
So I think my parents always felt like they were expats. Like they're living in Pittsburgh. My mother grew up in Pittsburgh. That's where I grew up. My dad is a New Yorker. But we would always have the New York Times and never the Pittsburgh local papers. and they always wanted to talk about Israel, and they always want to talk about something happening overseas, and um, that's what they wanted to talk about, and they wanted to read about it. What's interesting when I look back at it is that nobody in my family ever did anything in politics or public service. Well, I'll pause on that. Teachers, yes, but not firefighters, not working in government primarily in that way, but nothing ever in politics. No one ever came to Washington or worked, not even as an intern, but they were always engaged intellectually, thinking about it. And my mother was a writing professor. She spent a lot of her time speaking to Holocaust survivors and bringing in their stories. And so history and the state of Israel and that kind of like foundation became a big part of my upbringing at home. But the intellectual curiosity really came from direct debate and combat with my friends, because we're all out there. We're all like, in high school. I remember the AIDS crisis. I remember South Africa and apartheid. And I remember there were so many things happening, and we're engaged. And I was lucky enough to be around people who wanted to fight and argue and debate issues and ideas. And so it was always the issues. And that's really what inspired me. And I do believe my parents clearly had um, triggered that in me, but they didn't give me a pathway professionally. In fact, I never really spent significant time in Washington until I was 26, until an internship during graduate school. So I really never came to DC or wanted to work or chose to work in government or policy until much later in my life.
So, something that fascinates me about your story and the various jobs that you've had throughout your career is that I don't think that any of them are really jobs that a kid would ever have heard of, right?
No,
It's not like,
that's
oh,
right.
my dad's a doctor, a lawyer, a firefighter. You're like, oh, I was the under secretary. Or, there's
Yeah,
some complex terminology that, like,
yeah,
you have to really be in it to find that.
yeah.
So, I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about, you said briefly earlier, just continuing to follow your interests and curiosity, and how just slowly but surely chipping away, following those crumbs of curiosity led you to these unique roles that you wouldn't just like find on a job board in college.
Well, I mean, when I talk to young people about getting engaged in politics and policy and these issues, I always try to make sure that I get across the point, like, follow what you care about, follow what you're interested in, the issues. And so for me, in college, I studied politics, I studied Middle East affairs, and that was all really good. And I studied abroad in Israel. I engaged with Democratic stuff as a volunteer. I interned for John Kerry for a semester, which was very, very real, because I was doing like engagement with retirees and people who had social security concerns, and they needed the congressional office to help. And so, very much like that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. But what I did do, which was one tiny kernel of like a light bulb going off saying, oh, this makes sense, is I got a degree in elementary education during that. So I became a certified teacher. I liked working with kids. I volunteered in the city. I did a lot of work in sort of like public, communication in schools, as just like talking to young people and mentoring. And so I focused it. I got that degree, and I was sitting there. I remember this in Thanksgiving in my senior year with my sister, and we're like lying on the floor of my grandmother's apartment in Queens, New York. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm gonna do. Like, what do I do? And she's like, well, why don't you join the Peace Corps? It's like, oh, that's interesting. I can teach, I can go abroad, I can do things, real things. And so for me, it was issues and my international and my idealism all kind of fusing together into a specific, tangible thing where I could do something real. And so I applied, and had no idea where that would take me, but I knew that it would take me in a direction where I was doing things I cared about and where I was getting practical experience. And so that's the key. I have not lost that light. And so all these different jobs, we can go into it a little deeper if you want, but like basically, fast forward, I got into graduate school largely because I had a Peace Corps experience and they thought that was valuable. And then the graduate school, I focused on environmental work and sustainability at Carnegie Mellon. And then it was a policy degree in their policy school. And so then government seemed to make sense. And I interned in Washington. And then I, boom, applied for a presidential fellowship program. And I got in. And there I am in government in Washington. And just like realizing I can work on these issues, I can work on international, I can work on peace. And there are jobs in that. And the jobs are in government. And maybe they're later in nonprofit. And then it's like, oh, politics, which I love. This is the city for politics. I'm in government, but I like politics, so I can transition. And so you just keep on going, but it's following what you like and what
Yeah.
you care about and what you want to leave as your kind of imprint on the world.
That's cool how sort of like you came at this one core interest
Mm.
almost from two different directions,
Hmm.
one more intentionally and one sort of accidentally by winding around. But I want to hear a little bit more about the Peace Corps
Yeah,
because, broadly speaking, this podcast is about putting personal narratives into critical public health topics, which
good.
I define fairly broadly, right? Public health is many things,
Yes.
including many of Peace Corps activities.
Oh, yeah.
But I also am very passionate about just talking about the winding path, how picking up experiences here and there in life end up informing the work that you do later in ways that you couldn't have planned for, right? Like, for example, I'm now working in nutrition and health policy, and I've managed a food co op. Well, you wouldn't like go manage a food co-op intentionally to get
No.
valuable experience to take into food policy, but it happens that it's very useful experience when I'm working in that space. So, looking back at your time in the Peace Corps, I would love to hear a little bit more about that. What did you do? What was that like as a young person? How did it help you sort of figure out what steps you wanted to take next and ultimately return to graduate school? But also, what little kernels did you grab hold of during that time that later informed your work in ways that you couldn't have imagined?
Marion, I like the threads of a career, only one person can weave those together, and that's you, right? Like you are responsible for pulling all those threads together. There's nobody that's gonna knock on your door and say, aha, I see everything you've done, and it all makes sense this way in here. This is your job, right? You have to make sense of it. And in my head, it made sense. Different things make sense. I still have people to this day. I had a conversation last week with someone who spent 30 plus years at a single organization, and he said to me, you're a dilettante. You don't make sense. You moved around this and that. I'm like, I can't even begin to explain to this person, like, everything I'm doing makes sense. Everything I'm doing is working for me. So you own your reality and you own how to pull it together. And the same thing happened in the Peace Corps. In the Peace Corps, what happens is you get sent out to a village. You get 3 months of training and then you're gone. And I remember once I got out there and I'm gone, I was ostensibly there to teach environmental education. And that meant going to schools, right? Well, maybe. It meant actually I had to work with a local ag center. But what did it look like? Did it mean I went to schools? Did it mean I spoke with women's groups? Did it mean I engaged farmers? It meant all of that. And then I'm sitting in a village full time. It's like, what am I going to do with my time? Well, maybe I'm going to do some secondary projects like build a kids' environmental club. Uh, all of a sudden, before I know it, I'm being an entrepreneur. I'm like a social entrepreneur. I'm coming up with ideas. I'm listening to the market. I'm listening to the village where I'm at, and I'm learning what is it that I can do to help. Like my job is I'm here for a couple of years and then it's over. It's not to do things for people. It's to be a partner. My favorite one was we built a summer camp for kids that was focused on environmental topics. That wasn't like my idea, but it was because people who were leaders in the area wanted that for the kids and they knew what I was bringing and they said, let's do this. And we did it. So those are threads. There's like no magic person behind this stage that anoints you X outcome for your life and your career. But if you're not trying and thinking and innovating and connecting to what you care about, you're not going to be able to write your own life story. And so for you in health, you see the threads, you know how the co-op thing built you into who you are today. if someone had come to you and said, don't do that co-op thing because you'll never get to there, they might have undermined your ability to get there because you didn't do what you needed, actually. Uh, why is teaching environmental ed valuable to me as a person working in politics and foreign policy in Washington, D.C. 30 years later? Because it taught me about what it means to be part of this world. Other kids at that stage, they come right down after college. I have to work on Capitol Hill. I have to have an internship in foreign affairs. I'm important. I want to be there. Well, they don't know anything. They're just there. And they think that's because the school advisor said, do that. Hold on. Find your passion, and then you figure it out, and you can build those threads and bring it together. And for me, and I'll close with this. For me, the Peace Corps is the gift that keeps on giving. I was just out the other night with good friends who are former Peace Corps volunteers. We were having beers. We were talking about life. I mean, this is the kind of thing where we're always thinking about what can we do now. We are thinking about creating a PAC, a political action committee, that will give money only to candidates for Congress who want to support global peace. That's what it is. I could never have done that if I wasn't a Peace Corps volunteer.
I love that. And I think probably based on how you're describing it, the type of person who ends up in the Peace Corps and spends time in it and likes it and wants to network with fellow Peace Corps people has a certain type of brain that's very entrepreneurial, that's very
Little
creative.
crazy,
That's, yeah, a little crazy, a little
but
like grabbing at these
I'm
disparate
just going to
pieces and
interrupt you.
pulling it
When
together.
you're out there, I'm sorry, I just got to say, like,
Yeah.
when you're out there, you're out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're out there. There's no other way to say it. I'm in the middle of Central America on my own. I'm out there. There's nobody coming to pick me up and take care of me. And so that's when they throw you in the deep end. And once you learn to swim, like, you'll never turn back. I can do anything. That's my mindset now.
Okay, well, I love all of that, and I think I could probably ask you a million more questions about your time in the Peace Corps because I'm sure there are so many stories, and I do have some younger listeners who I think will be curious about that, but I'll just drop your, links in the bio down
Shoot
here,
me a note
and they
later.
can just
Yeah.
email you. Right now, I want to pivot a little bit because I do want to cover some public health topics.
Mhm.
And back in the day, 1 million years ago, when the COVID-19 pandemic first started, we all agreed it was a major public health crisis, and it sort of brought the topic of public health to the forefront in our society. And then throughout the pandemic, other things got piled on top of it. So, for example, Russia invaded Ukraine. And when that happened, which was now more than 2 years ago, people said, how are they going to handle the ongoing pandemic during the war, right? There was these sort of collapsed tragedies on top of each other and
Yeah,
these
that's right.
overlapping narratives around, okay, we're trying to manage food supply to an area that's being bombed and bombarded, but also, do they have masks? Do they have vaccines? Do they have clean water, etc.? Similarly, there is now a war going on between Israel and Palestine. But I'm not actually hearing the same level of conversation about the overlapping public health crises. I do hear a lot about, people starving and
Right.
access to clean water and safe shelter, but not quite as much about the many other public health tragedies that creep up when there's an ongoing war.
Yeah.
Now, Israel is a very
Yeah.
controversial topic right now, but
Yeah.
you're extremely informed on it, definitely much more so than I am. So I would love to hear from you a little bit about your understanding of what's going on, and also, I don't know, your thoughts on how we should be thinking about Israel-Palestine, not just as a political topic, but also as a public health topic.
So interestingly, Israel, they're hyper vigilant there on science in Israel itself. It was probably one of the first countries to get fully vaccinated, and they were getting out earlier than anywhere else by far. They had I'll broaden it out, but in Israel, the biggest problem on getting out of COVID and the vaccination was from the ultra Orthodox community, just like we have in New York, the ultra Orthodox Jewish community. They didn't want to get vaccinated. There was a lot of hesitance there, but Israel opened up. But then it got controversial because a lot of the vaccines, Israel apparently really held back on transferring those to Palestinians in the West Bank in particular. And for the listeners, I'm sure many people know, but Palestine is sort of West Bank and Gaza and is administered by a Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which has relations with Israel and the US. And then Gaza was administered by or led by Hamas, which does not. And so, very different realities. And so, for the Palestinian people, kind of being second tier from a health perspective within Israel and Palestine, even within Palestinian polity, there's two tiers. There's West Bank getting the resources and Gaza getting nothing. Gaza also has been a human tragedy for 15, 20 years, and there's a lot of blame to go around. I'll blame Hamas for a significant chunk of it. We can get into that, but so there's differences there. And now Israel did end up transferring vaccines. It kind of moved. They kind of moved past it on that. But public health, in the development community and in discussions in developing within developing world kind of dynamics, public health is always a primary focus because if you're not healthy, you can't develop. You can't have a strong economy. Women are held back. Children are malnourished. Uh, Health is one of the core foundations for a strong society, without a doubt. We know it here. We went nuts here during the pandemic. We didn't know how to deal with it. Most of the world has major health issues on a daily basis. Lack of nutrition is part of that, a subset, but we're talking health. We're talking TB. We're talking malaria. We're talking many maladies that harm the developing world at a much higher rate than Western Europe and countries with advanced economies. So that has to be paid attention to. I think within Israel Palestine, though, right now, that's it's sort of the pandemic is a bit in the rearview mirror, but the suffering of the Palestinian people now is acute, and in particular in Gaza, there's about 2.3 million Gazans, and basically 90% of them are displaced. And what's distinct about Gaza compared to other conflict zones is that typically in a conflict zone like Ukraine or Sudan, the affected population gets out of the way. But in Gaza, there's nowhere to go. They're actually locked in. They're walled off between Israel and Egypt at the southern border. Egypt's built a wall. Egypt will not let the Gazans out, so they're stuck. So there's bombs going into Gaza, and the people are kind of moving like almost like in tribal ways around to try to not get killed. Their homes are getting destroyed, and so 10 cities, and then you've got the potential for disease. And
Right.
so the aid agencies, one more thing to add, that historically have been supporting the Gazan people and Palestinian people overall, the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency, UNRWA, that has been supporting Palestinian livelihood and humanitarian assistance for 7+ decades since the 48 war that created the state of Israel. That is now about to go defunct because their staff there were many members of their staff that actually not many, a couple dozen, I don't know. There were numbers of their staff that participated in the actual genocidal, homicidal attack into Israel. And so international funding has stopped at this horrible time where the Palestinians are getting bombed, moving around, and now the aid agency to protect them is no longer getting funded. And that's why we're seeing the U.S. jumping in as much as we can. But this health thing, this can take off on a life of its own, and very quickly, sickness can spread, and that's, I think, a big fear right now amongst American military planners, for certain, at least.
Right. So obviously, this is a deeply complicated issue.
Highly
And
complicated. I
there are a
barely
lot
got to
of
the
layers,
surface.
I know. And I really feel like my own personal position on, frankly, many issues is that I don't have a side, but I want to be able to speak with quote unquote both sides and
Yeah.
find somewhere in the middle that we can find actionable solutions that
Hmm.
move everyone forward. Do you have a sense, because again, you're deeply studied on this topic, you've
Yeah.
spent time in Israel, go on the national and international news and speak on this topic on a regular basis. For the average listener who I'll just speak for myself and make myself the average listener, right? I turn on the news, I see updates on Israel Gaza, and I feel powerless. I feel like this is a crisis, and every fiber of my body wants to go, "Stop it now. Stop it now." And then I know that that's not really my choice. It's not really America's choice. Do you have a sense for what the average person can do day to day right now to feel like they're making any kind of a difference? They have any ability to help people in the world, whether it's the citizens of Gaza, the people of Israel, anyone who's suffering really everywhere, because Israel and Gaza is not the only, potential war slash homicidal, genocidal conflict going on. Like you
Hmm.
referenced a couple others, and there
Yeah.
are more. It's just the one that
There
gets
are
the
like
most
70
attention.
active wars right now.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
active wars and literal genocides happening
Yeah.
around the globe.
Yeah.
This is the one that we focus on, partially because the U.S. has a deep relationship. Um, but, not to put too much pressure on you
Hmm.
as a guiding light in this, but do you have any words of wisdom for those of us who feel powerless when we read about this topic and want to feel like there's something beyond just, praying, meditating, hoping that we can do?
Praying, meditating, and hoping is very important because what it does is gives you the grounding because these are complicated issues, right? Like, do we control crime in our own neighborhoods? Think about how hard that is,
Right.
right? Policing issues here in Montgomery County in the DC area yesterday just passed a bill on crime and policing because they've had a surge. It's very hard even in your own backyard. So humility is the first thing,
Yeah.
understanding that we don't control the world. We're a player in it. We're a shaper of it. The thing about the United States is we are the hegemon in many ways. We are the country that has the ability to, compared to any other country, still influence decision making by governments on how they will operate. In other words, America's government can talk to the Israeli government and explain to them our position on what we think they should be doing vis a vis the Palestinians. But that doesn't mean the Israelis are going to take our advice or do it. I hear a lot of arguments that people are putting out there, like if we just cut off aid to Israel, cold turkey, done. And now, for historic perspective, we've been giving Israel $3 to $4 billion a year in military aid since 1979. Why? Because they signed a peace treaty with Egypt, and we're giving about $2 billion a year to Egypt. About 1.5 is military aid. I managed that account when I was at the State Department earlier in my career. It's not a gift. It's a security investment. But if we cut them off tomorrow, do you think Israel would dry up? Would they stop having a military? Would they not have responded to Hamas that jumped the border and killed 1,000 of their citizens? No. They would build their own weapons and they would do things. So the humility in it. Okay, so if we can't, and I've heard people say this and they insisted, and I do not agree, that we can just tell Israel to stop. We can tell Israel, you got to wind it down. You got to move in this way or that. But how do we decide what to tell Israel? We clearly have a president and we clearly have appointees in Congress, but they also have constituents and they have people. And so the activism, the vote, which I have to say, I'm not like, I would not have voted uncommitted in Michigan, but because that's not me. But the uncommitted vote had an impact because it told Joe Biden and his political team, and this is where for me the light bulb went off earlier in my career, where it's like, oh, okay, I'll just digress if I may. I was working in the State Department during the Bush administration as a liberal Peace Corps guy. I was a career employee of the U.S. Department of State in Middle East affairs a couple years after 9/11. And we do what we got to do because we work in the government. And I remember when they launched the war in Iraq, and I was saying to my friends and I said, what are we thinking? What the hell is this? Why are we invading Iraq? They didn't do 9/11. But here I am on the inside working on this because I have to help secure. That's my job. I work on diplomatic communications. So I found a way to get out. But why did I find a way to get out? Because it hit me. Oh, yeah, you're a career guy. You don't make the decisions. The political people make the decisions. And the political people get their jobs because somebody won an election and appointed them. And that guy who won the election was George W. Bush. He didn't really win it, he stole it. But that said, there it is. So political decisions are what matters. When Joe Biden is thinking about what do I tell the Israelis to cut it out, that they're going over the top, that we're going to open up a humanitarian aid, and we're going to always back them for their security, but we think this is the wrong approach. We need to pivot them. It's his political people that are telling him that he needs to do it. He has a policy vision, but the ultimate decision is going to be not just what's the best policy, but what do my constituents, what do the American people want? And he's hearing the American people are concerned. Now, the community that supports Israel deeply, and I'm embedded in that, is very nervous about the security for the state of Israel. The challenge in the politics on Israel is how to open the aperture so that the U.S. government has a position that views peacemaking as central to Israel's long-term security. And that's the battle inside American Jewish politics, to be pro-Israel and support peace versus pro-Israel and turn your back on peacemaking. And that struggle is an ongoing dialogue in the Democratic Party in particular. And so if you want to get engaged, this is a long-winded way of saying we all can get engaged. We can get engaged and give money, you can donate, but you can get involved politically. And when you get involved politically as an activist, maybe in your hometown, you're writing letters, you get to know your member of Congress, you're organizing with groups who are holding symposia, maybe inviting speakers, maybe writing op-eds, maybe doing a protest. That's the kind of thing that influences the political people, because the political people are the magic decision makers in how the U.S. government operates. But after all that, we don't have a magic wand, right? We don't. We can tell Israel literally stop immediately, but that's just a position. We could say we'll cut you off entirely. You're done. We're saying that to Russia. We've organized the world against Russia. Have they stopped? So sometimes it's just a clash.
Right.
And I'll tell you, on Israel politics, this is extremely emotional too. So it's very important to be rooted and meditate, because a lot of people I view a dynamic now where a lot of people are losing their mental health. And going to your public health point, right? Like, you can't go crazy from this.
Right.
You got to keep your center, especially if you really want to see good decisions happen.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because where I want to go next with this is sort of a complicated question that weaves together the way that humans react to conflict and stress, and how to maintain sanity and humility in the midst of that. And especially when it comes to governing, but also just relationships. So, for example, when this issue with Israel first hit, right? I mean, it's an ongoing issue, but when the crisis happened in October, there was this kind of instant fight or flight response from a lot of people that was just like,
Mm-hmm.
F the Jews, basically, which
right.
I felt kind of creeped out
Wait a
by
minute,
immediately.
yeah.
I was like, wait a second, I'm sort of one of those. This is tricky. Similarly, it happened when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
I study Russian, so I have sought out and have a bunch of Russian friends. They felt immediately snubbed and hated. You could no longer buy Russian vodka in bars in Montgomery County. It was like, we just hate Russia, all Russians, so
Right.
much because their government did this thing.
Right.
Similarly, when, there's a police shooting or any kind of crime or violent act anywhere, you see people immediately respond with their claws fully out, and they make really big defensive generalizations, right? So there's a police shooting, all cops are bad. Or on the flip side, one person robs a store, every one of that ethnicity is bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are very quick to just, in this fight or flight defensive state, we're like unable to make compassionate human decisions. And so I lead all of this up to, we have a government run by people who we sort of ask/demand that they live in a constant state of fight or flight, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they can't sleep. They have this 24-hour news cycle
Mm-hmm.
that they're a part of. They're fundraising constantly because, well, you were just elected, but you're up for election again in a couple years, so buckle up, buddy.
Right.
It's a nonstop onslaught, and you just ended a congressional
Yeah.
campaign, so
Yeah.
I want to hear a bit of your direct experience of this. But I'm so curious if we want to have a healthy, mentally healthy world in which we approach every single situation as human beings, seeing other human beings in that, as opposed to racist or ethnocentric or nationalistic generalizations that are rooted in this, like, again, fight or flight, cortisol stress response. How do we approach that in our government? How can we enable our leaders to have healthier nervous systems, healthier brains? Like, is there a meditation workshop that we should be putting Congress through every morning? Like, my kindergartner does box breathing apparently at school. Are we doing that for our leaders? And then, as if that question weren't
It's good.
complex enough, I want to add on to there, you have a bipartisan marriage, right? You're
Hmm.
a registered Democrat, your wife is a registered Republican.
Hmm.
So it
And we've both worked in those spaces too. We're not
exactly,
just
right.
voters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you're really engaged in those
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear both your vision for how do we make a mentally healthier world by enabling our leaders to have supported mental health so they can make clear human decisions, but also, how do we all bring that home to our dinner tables, to our families, and see the people across from us not as red or blue, but as full blown humans?
You know what? It's really fascinating. Right now, when you mentioned that about my Republican wife, it hit me. That's actually helpful and a reason for why I have mental health in this stuff. Um, in defense of nuance is how I'll describe what I'm going to articulate here, which is that um, I don't believe I know everything. And I don't believe I should be surrounded by people who think like me on everything. And I think that's part of our mental health crisis is we are self-selecting ourselves into a position where we no longer can, it's like we can't engage difference anymore. And that is deeply harmful. That's like inbreeding,
The echo chamber.
the echo chamber, but it's inbreeding.
Hmm.
And it's unhealthy for the brain. One of the benefits of having a wife who's not originally Jewish is a first generation woman of color, and a Republican is that we're very different. And so I check my assumptions and my expectations, my beliefs, and what is definitely right. I'm sure some people won't like what I'm going to say, but I will say it. I find a lot of the most vitriolic people in protests and online are surrounding themselves with people who are just like them. They're not open to diversity of thought. I'm not saying just look, but thought, difference. And Marian, this may be the best gift I got from the Peace Corps. Because you know what it's like to be a white Jewish kid from the United States going to a rural Catholic village in Central America full of Latinos and people of color who have a distinct way of life. You know what? They're my brothers and sisters. The first people to call me after October 7th were the people from the village, my family brother. He checked in to see if I was okay.
Wow.
Way ahead of some of my progressive friends here who basically did, well, Israel to blame, screw Israel, Jews, Jews, Jews. People I've worked with for years in progressive politics turned their back on me. But people in the Peace Corps from the village, Catholic, um, conservative in a sense, politically, are you okay? What's going on? I think that we are driving ourselves into a ditch when it comes to mental health because of that. And so you see our politics, this idea of, and I served in the Senate as a staffer of foreign policy aide for a couple of years. We worked across party lines. This idea that bipartisanship is good and we should work with everyone is not just rooted in the technical thing. It's actually good for the country because it turns out that our country is incredibly diverse. And so my sense when I talk to members of Congress or government officials or people who are in the Biden administration, I do have the good fortune of knowing a lot of folks in those spaces, is that they they need people who are willing to listen to them and who can provide nuance and support. And that's a lot of what I do. Like I give some feedback. I give some things that are a little different from what they're wanting to hear, and I let them vent, and we and nuance and talking. And when I go on TV, I try to make sure that I'm providing context and nuance and not just attacking, and beating up the other side. People are looking for that. They're craving that because we seem to have a culture where clicks are the most important barometer of one's value in life. And clicks are driven by people who are um, utilizing their platforms for evil. And sorry, watch this. This is important. But look, I'm telling you, I've been on podcasts with people who basically spend most of their day, their feeds are pure drivel of how Jews should stop loving Israel and it's their fault. And they get huge rating increases. And I'm brought on, and I'm like, really? So you're bringing me on to basically beat me up to grow your fan base to think that you're more valuable? And what you're actually doing is polluting our public environment
Yeah.
and harming our brains and our mental health. And if you want to have solutions in society, you have to find ways to work with people.
Yeah.
I mean, autocratic societies are unhealthy. Democracies are healthy. Democracies are healthy because imagine if you were in a society, if we were in a society where we literally could not do what we're doing right now, where we literally could not communicate our ideas, where we could not vote, where we could not organize. I had a grad student. I taught grad school for a few years. She's Chinese from mainland China. She was here on a Fulbright. And I went to China in 2019 with my daughter, who was in a Chinese immersion program. We visited and I spoke with her. I saw her there. I said, "How are you? How's it going?" And she was brilliant. Here, there, she was like, "Well, I can't do my environmental work anymore." Why? Because Chinese government cracked down on her. She looked like she had had her dreams shut down. What does that do for your mental health? It
Yeah.
kills it. So we need a flourishing, vibrant democracy. We need outlets. We need nuance. We need engagement with diversity. And we need problem solving. That's how you get real mental health in this country.
I love that you mentioned inbreeding because just to have fun for my own like agenda here, I have this metaphor that I don't actually think is a metaphor. I think it's true. But I've spent enough time studying both policy and biology that I see metaphors for one and the other in between them. And I really do think that you're right that when you surround yourself with people who only think the same things as you do get less and less healthy new ideas from that because you are inbreeding. And when you look at the environment, diversity is a key marker of health.
Yes.
Healthy competition is good. And sometimes one species rises up and then it falls back down. And that sort of dynamism is very critical to long term survival.
This is
And
really
when you
big.
look at a coral reef, this is what I think is so important. And I brought this up in a previous conversation. A coral reef, so beautiful, so diverse, so colorful. I mean, picture it, right? All the different fish and plants and algae. Well, over time, due to certain factors, global warming and water acidification, the diversity in a coral reef will shrink away and it will become more and more homogeneous when it comes to species.
Mm-hmm.
But it still looks fine. It still looks healthy.
Oh,
And if you're a
interesting.
starfish living in that coral reef and you look around and all your neighbors are starfish, you might think, this is the best this coral reef has ever looked. I love all my starfish neighbors. We look amazing. We're all the same. Strong starfish coral reef power. And the next day, the entire coral reef is dead.
Wow.
Right before collapse of an ecosystem, it becomes as little diversity as it's ever had, right?
Wow.
How can we learn from that as a society? We have this craving
Yeah.
to be right and to surround ourselves by voices that make us feel like we're right and everything we ever thought was justified and all the things that we did were true. I feel like if you look around a room and everyone around you thinks the same thing as you, your ecosystem is about to collapse. Run, run away, starfish. Go find a new habitat because we see that in
Yeah.
nature and I think that we see it in civilizations when democracy falls to autocracy.
Yeah.
It's that diversity of thought shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and under that pressure it ends up destroying the
It's
ability
brilliant.
to be resilient and healthy. So I'm with you.
Intellectual inbreeding, very
Yes,
unhealthy.
intellectual inbreeding. That's the title of our new memoir. We're going to talk about how bad that is, or maybe it's like a self-help book, actually, not a memoir.
How to get out of the
It's a
inbred.
how to
So
get
so my
out.
wife, her father is deceased, but he had this line, which is not politically correct, but he said, "Mixed babies have better brains." So
Yes, and I think that's true when it comes to many different kinds of mixing, right? You definitely want to diversify the population. I think, I've experienced this in my own background. I was at a time, young, youthful, and a bit more political, I would say. And I just had these beliefs that I just sort of latched onto. And then I had some people who I thankfully loved and respected and could have conversations with challenge me on them, right? And because I loved and respected and could converse with them, and wasn't just some stranger on the internet going, "Fuck you, you idiot," right? It was someone that I cared about. So I had a conversation and I was like, "Oh, actually, yeah, there is a nuanced middle ground that I'm willing to approach with you here. Like, I'm not actually firm on this. I am open to thinking about ways that we could make this better for everyone and not just my belief system." And I'll never forget like how important that was to my development.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I know I'm repeating this Peace Corps thing and the lessons from that experience, but you know, I mean, I was 23 and I was out in the field working in a community that was extraordinarily different from anything I'd been exposed to in my entire life. And um, I think that we have certainly, and this will sound like the old man talking, but like we have an activist culture now amongst younger people that is rooted in clicktivism, right? Like they're sitting there at their computer and they're telling the rest of the world how to behave. Get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
Go do something. And don't just do something with your people so you can say how smart and bright you are and the other people are wrong. Do something for your community. Get a job, volunteer, like with difference. By being in a diverse environment in my formative, original professional experience, it taught me that I literally don't know everything. And in fact, I loved the fact that I was challenged. My assumptions were completely blown up as to what is right and what is wrong in the world by living in this village. I remember I was like the Jewish guy out in the village, and we'd have the priest would come by and we would talk about religion. And then I would go to church on Sunday morning with the moms in the village, and then the bar on Sunday afternoon with the guys. And you start to kind of accept the fact that we are all equal. There's literally no difference between any of us, literally zero. And I hear it now in some of the chauvinism from people on the Israel conflict as well, and sort of chauvinism, like it's us versus them. We know what's right, they don't. The sort of clash of ideas. I am proudly Jewish. I'm very, very into it, right? But like, you're no different from the people in Gaza. There's nothing different. We all are humans. We have a different culture, language, food habits, but you know what? We're actually the same. We just happen to be plopped into a different part of the world. And that matters. And that changes the way we talk about the other in all directions. And I think for me with my daughters, the key thing in raising them at this stage in life is to get them as exposed as possible to difference so that they are open-minded and humble and they're not closed to growing and not inbred
Yes,
intellectually.
intellectually inbred. So speaking of your daughters, I have a couple like wrap up questions that I want to make sure I get to with you. And the first is about women's health and women's rights, which
Sure.
are critical public health topics.
Yep.
So we are both the proud parents of three daughters. Woohoo.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a scary time, although I try to remind myself historically, looking back over the past 1,000 years, still relatively speaking, the least scary time to be a woman, especially in the
Right.
Western world.
Right.
But right now, coming out of, 70s, 80s, 90s, as a parent in the West, it does feel like a scary time to be raising daughters. And you posted
Yeah.
recently on social media about how your daughters right now have less bodily autonomy, fewer rights around their own bodies and their own reproductive health than your wife did at the same age, and how that feels like a step backward. So, I would love to hear you speak a little bit about, again, putting this personal narrative into critical public health topics, how your experience as a hashtag girl dad has informed your view on women's health and women's rights, but also why, in general, as someone who's traveled the world and seen women all over the world, and again, like you just said, sees how we are all the same. I was born in the US, but my brain is not magically more thoughtful than a woman born in a country where she's not allowed to speak her mind, right? We both have these beautiful female human
Innately
brains.
identical.
Exactly, and yet here I am allowed to speak and be on camera and be myself and explore, and there are women all over the world who don't have that opportunity. So, what are your thoughts on sort of the future of women's health and women's rights, maybe most critically in the US right now, but potentially globally as well?
Well, let's just go cut straight to the chase. We have a segment in this country that wants to control women. We have an ideological, intellectually inbred segment of this society and our government and our politics on the hard right Republican side, frankly, that wants to tell women what to do. And they do want to take away bodily autonomy because they don't believe that women should have bodily autonomy because they believe that women are there as vessels to procreate. That is an ideological position. So for the rest of us who live in the real world, who actually believe that we're all equal human beings and that we should all make choices about who we want to be and what our bodies can and cannot be, like it's my body. Nobody has the right to tell me what to do with my body in any way, shape, or form. We have to fight back politically because the politics of women's health are central to the vision and the future of the United States of America. Women's health and body control will determine who wins the White House and who wins Congress. And if it goes for those who believe in bodily autonomy, then the legislative process that follows suit will guarantee that they will have that control. If it goes in the other direction, and if the religious fundamentalists on the Republican side take power and Donald Trump gets in the White House, they will pass laws in the other direction and strip women away from all their rights. And you won't have the ability to have contraception either. It's gone. All right. So women will not have control over their bodies. Then they're coming for me, right? Who knows? Forced sterilization was within living memory. On a personal level in my family, my wife is a only child. Why is she an only child? Because her mother, who was an immigrant to the United States, was forcibly sterilized after giving birth to my now wife
Wow.
in Washington State in 1972. This is public record. This is out there. There's my wife wrote an op-ed about it. And what did the doctor say after he forcibly sterilized her? He said, "No more brown babies for you." That's within living memory. So this is not like we are living in a world where it's always going in one direction. It can go in a lot of different directions. And this is why I love policy and politics, because we're talking policy and women's health. It's not an independent variable. It's a dependent variable on politics. And politics is nothing more than the expression of what the people want. Politics is an art. So what do the people want? And they tell the people who they put in office, and those people make decisions about the policy. It's all connected. And so if you want a future where you are free, you and your daughters and my daughters are free to literally decide for themselves who they are and what they want to be, and nobody can tell them otherwise, we must install leaders who will allow those decisions to take place through legislative action. Right now, we're in another land. We're like in no man's land. We had Roe v. Wade, which essentially guaranteed abortion rights for women, but it was always sort of being chipped away here and there. Now that's gone, and we're like in free fall. There's like 22 states that are already basically banning abortion. Some states are trying to codify it into the Constitution. Maryland, they are. So this is like crazy. It's a patchwork of nutty. So for an American woman, now our daughters have to decide where they want to go to college. Do they want to go to college where they can't get an abortion? Is that a good idea? Probably not.
Right.
So That then bleeds into that public health question, bleeds into the health of our country, the health of our economy. I'll just say one more thing. If you look at the healthiest, best economies in the world, they're where there's free flow of labor and capital, where capital can move across borders. That's why there's a European Union. Uh, 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 we have a strong economy because we basically, the dollar is the global currency, but also free flow of labor. Imagine if every single state in the United States essentially created major impediments to economic activity. You couldn't move a business from Maryland to Missouri. Like, it's crazy. It would freeze our economy. We need to have that freedom so that the economy can stay vital. And that's why we're the best economy in the world. We still are. What is this doing to our women and our society when women suddenly are stuck?
Right.
Okay, now you're stuck. You have 3 daughters. Husband gets fired, needs a new job somewhere else. He can only get in the red state. Do you move there? So this is screwed up. And it's all connected.
It is all connected. And I want to add on a personal note, you said earlier, this line, like in defense of nuance. I was raised in a very progressive, liberal, affluent area. And I got pregnant when I was 18. And I had most people in my life who were all, good, party, towing the line of the party progressives say to me, well, great, you have a choice. So go ahead and get an abortion. And I said, no, I have a choice. And I'm choosing to become a mom. I thought about it long and hard. I'm going to be a mom. And they said, no, you have a choice to get an abortion. And I'll never forget that because it was very much this when people just pick a side and don't allow for that nuance. And so, what I want to just add to what you said, which I very much agree with, is like education is so important. Like letting people know enough about the complexities of a topic that they truly do value freedom on that topic and not just their way as opposed to the other way, right? Like in red states, women have to have babies, and in blue states, they should get abortions.
There
Like,
you
right?
go.
It should never be that simple because of course, like being a teen mom is not the right choice for a lot of women. It's difficult and I wouldn't like recommend it per se, but it was the right choice for me and I was fortunate to have people who supported my
And
actual
you're happy.
and my happiness and like my true body autonomy, right?
Right.
Like I got to make that autonomous choice. And it's weird how we sometimes twist the word choice to make the choice seem obvious when
We're so liberal that we're going to tell you exactly what to do.
exactly, like you're a good liberal, obviously good liberals get abortions. And
Yeah.
I was like, "Hold on a second, I'm a liberal for choice. Like the word choice means something to me."
Right.
So I hope that, for my daughters, your daughters, women all over the country and world, that they are always allowed to really just get to know their own bodies, I think
Mm.
is what I want. Like as humans, we all just strive to get to know ourselves. Who are we on this planet? Why are we here? What are we doing? This place is crazy. Like why do we get up every single day and live our lives? And getting to know yourself is one of the most important parts of that. And if we aren't allowed to make choices about our bodies, if those choices are codified
It's
into law,
ridiculous. Yeah.
sorry, you're pregnant, so this is who you are now. You're a mom. If we can't make those choices, who are we and how can we ever be fully actualized humans?
You can't be. And that's the sad reality is it's just like my former student who's in China in a dictatorship where she basically can't be who she wants to be professionally. If you're a woman and you are no longer allowed to truly have dominion over the decisions about your body, you can't fully be yourself. You can't fully self-actualize. You can't go for that job in that state. You can't.
Yeah.
And this is the sad reality is that for all those activists who are saying that they're pro-life, what they're actually doing is diminishing life. They're diminishing and taking away the quality of life of the people who are here. And it's rooted in religious fundamentalism. And I think the thing now as a Jew that's so different as a Jew versus other religions is we're not trying to convert anybody. Like we're not out there proselytizing. We're tiny. There were 18 million of us before World War II. There are 15 million of us today. We still haven't made up for what we lost during the Holocaust. We're not trying to tell the rest of the world to be Jews. I don't want the rest of the world to tell me what to be either. And I think for women, just like anyone, should not go to bed at night wondering if the next day somebody's going to take away your ability to be who you are and who you want to be. And that is truly the epic battle of our time. And I'll just add to this, in dictatorships around the world, Putin as an example, you look at China, what's the sort of like common thread? Control of other humans. They want to tell the people in their countries exactly what to and not to do, what to say and what not to say. Otherwise, they will imprison you. And to me, taking away women's rights is one step further to dictatorship.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Speaking of topics that keep people up at night, I want to kind of close with, again, putting this personal narrative into a critical public health topic: health insurance.
Mm.
Obviously, in this country, a complex topic, fragmented, struggling. You worked for Bernie Sanders. He
Mm-hmm.
was running largely on a campaign of Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
This continues to be a very fragmented, critical, and complex, nuanced topic.
Yeah.
But you had slash have some personal experience
Yeah.
where your life and some things that popped up that you couldn't have expected
Yeah.
overlapped with this conversation. So, can you talk a little bit about what you experienced and what your thoughts are on the future of healthcare in America?
Nobody knows when they're going to get sick. And nobody asks to be sick. A little over a decade ago, I woke up one day and I had a ringing in my ear, and I was like, "What is that?" And so I, stuck my finger in my ear, and then I went in the shower and like put water in. Maybe that'll get rid of it. No, it didn't go away. And I said to my wife, "I think I have a brain tumor." She's like, "You don't have a brain tumor." I'm like, "I think I have a brain tumor. Something's in there." Well, turns out I had a brain tumor. I had what's called an acoustic neuroma, and that's a tiny benign tumor, but they're located in horribly delicate spots. And so it's in the vestibular area. It was growing off my balance nerve, and it punctured into my auditory nerve, which it's wrapped together with the facial nerve. And that puncturing caused the sound that didn't stop. So I had to get surgery. I had to get it removed because if you don't get it removed, it grows to the point where it hits your brainstem and causes a stroke and you die. Not
Benign.
not a good outcome. Benign but deadly, right?
Yeah.
And so they took it out. I went to Hopkins. It's supposed to be 6 hours. Turned out it was 9 hours. Turns out that my heart rate dropped because anesthesia and I don't like each other. And I woke up in the ICU, and the doctor who had thought he could save my auditory nerve said, nope, it was too saturated. Took it out. Took out the balance nerve. Saved the facial nerve, so I have full facial function, meaning I can swallow and open and close my eye and smile and be a normal face as opposed to losing function. But the world was diagonal because they took out the balance nerve. So I had to retrain my brain that the world is flat, and I had to do vestibular exercises and looking and all that all crazy stuff. Fast forward, so here I'm 43, have my head cut open, I have 3 kids, and I have insurance. Or I don't. I probably dropped another $10,000 to pay the bills, despite having Blue Cross and good insurance. And it was crazy. And I remember thinking, well, how about those poor guys with TBI from the wars walking around messed up? I was one of those people, different reason for it, but I spent months walking around loopy, imbalanced. You looked at me, I looked like I do now, but I was messed up. It took years for me to finally get good. I actually rode my bike thinking everything was fine. My balance was off. I flipped the bike, broke my wrist, right? 8 months after surgery. So it was cascading problems. I'm lucky enough I have resources and support. It can be debilitating. Our medical system is fucked up. And I should not have dumped all the money I had to dump just to become normalized. And so we do need Medicare for all. We do need a system that takes care of people. Nobody knows when the lightning bolt's going to strike. I didn't do anything for this. They say it's 1 in 100,000. Even if I did do something for this, even if I was a chain smoker, not my fault. Or yes, my fault, and who cares, right? It's irrelevant. There's so many things in life that come up. No one knows when it's your time. But when you get sick, and I think it's diabolical that we have a political party in a Republican Party that's trying to take away the Affordable Care Act, even base insurance. And I, as you hear, hate the way their insurance industry works, but it's a hell of a lot better than nothing. We have to take care of people. The last thing you should be worried about at night is whether you can pay your medical bills or if I go to the doctor, I'm not going to be able to afford food, or if I get sick, frankly, I'll go bankrupt. Or all that stuff that should not even be on the table. We have more than enough money to go around in this country. We have trillions of dollars of unpaid taxes by extremely wealthy corporations who are not paying their fair share, who could capitalize our health system in a way where we could provide medical care. And I'll tell you, I'll close with this. I'll tell you why I know this is true. Because when I was in the Peace Corps, I was in a country called Costa Rica. Guess what they have? Universal health care. And guess what? They have life expectancy that's 2 years higher for men and for women than the United States. And they have a public health system with clinics all around the country that people can go to. And they have a parallel private system if you want to pay extra to jump the line, maybe for a surgery. It can be done. It's all about the political will to do it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that
Thanks,
personal
Marian.
story because it's very important to hear how individuals interact with these huge, sometimes too huge, too much to really get your head around topics. So I am so grateful to you for sharing that and for
Thanks.
everything that you shared today. I want to just once again kind of reiterate a couple of the really key things that you said about nuance and humility and humanity. We did cover some really tricky topics today, global crises, health crises, women's rights, and importantly, how all of it is connected. So I want to thank you for being someone who has
Thanks.
chosen to have this super stressful career as a public facing policy politician. It's not for the faint of heart. So thank you for showing up every
Thanks,
day and
Marian.
for fighting the good fight, but for also being someone who is open and nuanced and continues to have these difficult conversations because
Thanks.
I really believe that we need that and that the future of health and society depends on real human conversations.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you today about this stuff. It's an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you once again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. For more information on my guest, Joel Rubin, please find a link in the show notes. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Informed Solutions Consulting. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.